Peace, and welcome. We're glad you're here. This is the Cook on Monday Morning YouTube channel. My name is Stevon Cook. Excited to start a really incredible conversation with some of America's leading education policy minds. Really fortunate to know and be in community with these folks. We have a really important issue to discuss. We've seen that has been popping up all over the country as members of our respective school boards. We're dealing with this on a daily basis. And I thought it would be beneficial to get some perspectives from people that are actually on the ground, seeing the work and affecting change in their respective communities. So at Cook on Monday Morning, we believe that if you can own Monday morning, you can own the week. If you can own the week, you can own the year. And if you change your year, you can change your life. This is an independent media production. This will not be brought to you by a toothpaste company, a sugary drink, or some medicine to help you sleep. These are men and women of the people doing the good work on behalf of the people. And with that, I am going to have them start to introduce themselves. We'll start with Miss Adorian Thomas. She's going to just share with us her name, where she's obviously from, and how she's opening school.
Thank you, Stevon. And it feels so good to be here on the Cook on the Morning Show. Honored and privileged to be in this space with each of you. Dorian Murray Thomas, and I'm a proud school board member in the city of Newark, which is the state of New Jersey's largest public school district, serving over 36,000 students. But if you include our charter school students, over 55,000 students here in the state of New Jersey. We will be opening schools on September 8th, and we will be using a hybrid model whereby parents who would like to self-select for their students to work virtually will be able to do that. And those of them who would prefer for their students to be physically in space will have that option as well. And so we just voted on our reopening plan last week, and the conversation is still going. The governor actually just released a statement about 2 days ago, which shared that schools actually now have the right to do full virtual learning if they plan. And so there are certain districts who are considering resubmitting plans, et cetera. And so there's still some interesting work there, but I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to the dialogue this evening.
Mr. Blair.
Thanks for having me as well, Stevon. This is an awesome group representing a lot of geographic diversity. And I am a school board member in Gwinnett County, a suburb outside of the city of Atlanta. And we are also the largest school system in our state, in Georgia. And with 180,000 kids, any decision we made was going to be a difficult one. And we went back and forth month to month. Initially, we had said that we were going to give parents the choice to enroll in person or choose a digital option. Then we went to a completely digital option. We actually started school yesterday, all digital. But we made an announcement a couple weeks ago that for those parents who did choose the in-person option, we would begin phasing in 2 weeks. That is amid a very contentious situation with our coronavirus guidance and caseload in the county, and our really minimally strapped public health department, where we're seeing spiking cases in this county, which are disproportionately affecting and inflicting pain on our Black and Latino families. And so there is a lot of question with respect to when is the right time to reopen, and whether or not we should be setting arbitrary dates, or whether or not we should be basing reopening on thresholds that we meet based on public health guidance. So I've stood firm that we're not in a place now where I think that we can safely reopen, and we should be reallocating a lot of our energy into putting the conditions in place in our schools in order to bring students back. And we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks, but currently our plan is to phase folks in a couple of weeks.
Mr. Ashely.
Well, Stevon, it's good to be back on the Cook on Monday Morning show. You are a legend when it comes to setting out, great dialogue that folks need to hear. And so being able to be on this this podcast with two of my favorites, man. I'm excited. I just want to admit that. So to Everton, Dorian, thank you. Ethan Ashely, I have the opportunity to serve as board president in New Orleans, Louisiana. We are not the largest district in Louisiana, but we're definitely the most unique district, having most of our schools being ran by charter management organizations. What I will say is the way in which we are reopening after being very clear as a district that the health and safety of our families, our students, and our teachers is number one. And looking at the health crisis as it currently exists around coronavirus locally and the numbers, it's not safe to reopen. We made that decision as a district, and we are now in a process where we were clear that we were reopening in a virtual way. School has been starting. School has started in New Orleans in a virtual way. I've had the opportunity to visit a lot of our schools at this point who are doing virtual experiences. Orientation was really has been the last week and a half. A lot of families are coming to pick up their digital devices. So we're at a place where we're about 1-to-1. And for those families where we're not 1-to-1, we are in back order, like I'm pretty sure many districts are, to get those devices to those family members. And so we are right there in terms of becoming 1-to-1, which I think to Everton's point earlier, we should have always been that way. And I'm glad that we're finally getting there as a district. And so I say all that to say, we are going to revisit where we're standing in terms of reopening after Labor Day. We're going to continue to look at the health trend data, and what the health trend data is telling us is going to inform how we as a district move in this moment relative to in-person school for our young people.
Thank you, Mr. Ashely. One of the things I also wanted to mention was today's event was also helped put together by the Young Elected Officials Network. I really appreciate their support in getting the word out and helping to put this together. We're actually using a Zoom account to broadcast live on YouTube. I had one of those, but the way my bank account is set up, the checking and the savings, I couldn't really do it without YEL. So thank you, YEL. And I also had the good fortune of meeting these good people through an organization that Ethan founded called School Board Partners, co-founded called School Board Partners. And so those groups collectively have helped organize this, and I deeply appreciate it. We have some important news that just hit America around a vice presidential pick. I wanted everyone to kind of weigh in on that really quickly before we got into the meat of the discussion. And I'm especially interested in hearing what you want to see from the ticket around education. So initial reactions and any expectations around education. Mr. Dorian?
So I'm definitely showing my age a little bit here, but I remember being in 9th grade when President Obama got elected. And at the time, I was going to a small boarding school in Massachusetts, 4 hours away from my house in New Jersey. And my mom drove all the way from Jersey. We got a hotel just so that I could be able to watch this historic election with my mom. And I remember being so angry because I'm like, I'm only 14. I won't be able to vote for the first Black president. And so a few days ago, when the news came out about Kamala being the pick, I just got so emotional. I really just sat there for a moment because I was like, I've been dreaming of a day like this, to be able to cast a ballot for a Black woman or a Black man to occupy the highest seat in office of the land. And so in this case, as vice president, I am more emotional than I can put in words. I'm honestly still processing because it's a historic moment. It's a significant moment, but it's also one that has brought up a lot of really important and pertinent questions that this country has had to grapple with. One of which I think is just showing how, Black women always have to bear the brunt of white supremacy in a way that is extremely unique And so just to see a woman who is this successful and this achieved be, you know, questioned whether or not she's Black, whether or not she's a real American, right? These whole birtherism questions, all these things are just absolutely absurd, but just exposing what we know about some of the deep issues within this country. At the same time, I think there are also some really important questions about the limitations of representative politics. And is it enough just to have a Black woman in the vice president office or on the ticket? And the answer is no. Right? We know that representation alone is not liberation. And so we always have to do the work, regardless of who we put in the White House, regardless of who we put in the governor's office or even the school board seats. We got to hold them accountable. We have to do the work behind. And so there's a few things that I'm hoping for in terms of what she would push for education. I mean, two that come top of mind is just one, and you could just look at COVID as exhibit A, that it took so much organizing and legwork from educators, from school board members, like school board partners, right, who work together and get a letter, a petition together to advocate for funding for schools. It seemed like for so many Congress people, education was the last thing that people were thinking about when it came to COVID relief. And how is it that we have a federal government that puts the education of the next generation of people at the back burner? And if we'll do that in a pandemic, that only exposes the fact that that's clearly something that we do in real time when there isn't a pandemic. And so I'd hope that overall, just both in terms of funding and in terms of just agenda items, that funding for education is more of a priority. And specifically too, when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, how do we, from the highest office of the land, talk really honest about the ways in which the carceral system that we have that incarcerates Black and brown and poor people at higher rates than folks from different other races or other socioeconomic statuses has only really reflected itself in the suspension and discipline practices in our schools. They mirror each other in terms of the over-incarceration, over-criminalization, overly punitive nature of the discipline system. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done on how do we empower districts and educators and states to have real conversations and accountability measures in place for making sure that we are not re-perpetuating systems of essentially state violence against Black and brown bodies, both at the state level and then which you can see is reflected even in our schools through harsh disciplinary practices.
Thank you for that. Mr. Blair?
So powerful, completely agree. I was a Kamala Harris day one. She came to Atlanta early in her campaign, and we built, I would say, a pretty strong relationship from there. I endorsed her, became one of her surrogates, and lended some peer review to her education policy proposals, one of which was regarding teacher pay, a huge boost for, I think it was $13,000 was going to be the average increase that she would propose through the Department of Education to increase teacher salaries, which would have a significant impact on our ability to retain, really attract and retain high quality talent in our public education system. I think that she will be a tremendous vice president, agree with everything that Adorian said. And I think that her shrewdness with respect to the Senate makes it, one, incumbent upon us to give her the Senate that she would need in order to advance progressive policy and legislation for the country. And two, we'll speak to her sharpness and her ability to really speak truth and center the bread and butter issues that affect everyday Americans, which she has not shied away from since the second she launched her campaign. I'm proud of her. She is somebody who has invested in local people. Doesn't matter like where we were in Iowa, Georgia, DC, South Carolina, she would find you and remember your name, remember the interaction, and like spend minutes with you like you were the most important person in the world. I've seen her do that with everyone that she's encountered. And I think that's the spirit of the person that we need in the White House, not somebody who is colluding with foreign officials, or actually, I'm not even going to go there because we could start talking about him forever. But we need somebody who actually represents our values and speaks to who we are as a country. And I think that she and President Joe Biden will do a tremendous job.
Mr.
You know,
Ashely.
I think this is easy for me. I mean, all I have to do is hit this one call, and everyone's gonna know where I stand. HU, and everyone who's from HU would say, you know, right? And I'm a two-time graduate of Howard University undergrad and the law school. I am a proud graduate of an HBCU, and I am super proud to see Kamala be where she's at in this moment. But it's not lost on me. This moment isn't lost on me because the truth of the matter, I mean, she is, and so is, President, the Democratic nominee, Joe Biden. They're in a really serious fight for our country's democracy. And I think if we're not clear about that, then I think it's lost on us what this moment really means. I mean, we are fighting two pandemics that one has been going on for 400 plus years. And the other one is a real health threat to the lives of people who look like us on this call, on this Zoom call. And what I will say is that to have representation is not just important, but is essential, I think, in this moment, relative to folks really understanding critically how this is impacting the day-to-day livelihoods of just normal working class individuals. And when you don't have that understanding, when you don't come from that type of background, when you don't have those relationships, I think you get the White House that you have currently, that is not full in thinking about the people who make up America and who actually, in my personal opinion, makes America great, which is us. And I think that's important to be able to acknowledge. That's important to be able to note. And I think Kamala is definitely a boost to that ticket and will advance us in a way that I think is necessary. Now, I want to be clear about the educational policies that I'm going to talk about, right? I think funding is definitely the number one thing we always got to keep in mind whenever we get a chance to get in front of anyone of authority at the federal level. Please, please, please give us more funding. I think there's been a lot of conversations about cutting funding and all that rhetoric. It's not enough. We don't have enough money to fund our schools the way in which we need to, and that's just a fundamental fact. Now, beyond that, I think the pandemic has kind of the pandemic of COVID-19 has kind of exacerbated the inequities that exist within our systems. And one of the clearest things is this digital divide. And if we can't, as a country, get to the 21st century with a comprehensive infrastructure package around connectivity and making all of our cities in our rural areas and suburbs connected, I don't know. I mean, we're wasting money in districts on Wi-Fi devices, hotspots, when we could just really invest that money in infrastructure and have our cities be more connected. So that's a big thing. And the last thing I'll say is this. It's not directly tied to education, but it is because the intersectionality of these things are really important. But we have to widen our safety net so that educators don't have to always be the go-to for dealing with mental health issues or housing issues or food insecurity. We have to, we need them to stand up and widen that safety net. And I think that would lessen the burden on our educators. And I'm all for Everton. Let's pay these teachers more. My mother was a teacher. My grandmother's a teacher. Let's get these teachers some money. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all weighing in on that. I might have a slightly alternative perspective on on all the recent news, but I will say before I say that I actually had Elizabeth Todd Berlin on the podcast, and she wrote this really great book and talked about in that book the politics of Black student achievement and what we've all been contending with in our respective cities. And we can kind of dig into this and why this pandemic pod is so phenomenal in various ways is that at least in San Francisco, achievement hasn't really moved. And when I think about Black student achievement, it really should be apolitical. and the lack of, I would say, progress, everyone is complicit in. So when I think about national leadership, I'm not as excited about them as I am excited about the three of you. I want to see the three of you go on to those positions, and I'm sure you will. But I have a lot of expectations, and a feel good moment is good for people, and I wouldn't cast light throw shade on that, but I'm really looking to see what the policy promises are going to be, and I think they all should be held accountable to records that weren't always positive for the Black community, and that's on both sides of the ticket. But we're here to talk about pandemic pods, and in response to COVID-19, we've all seen the national statistics related to the higher contraction rates in the Black community. We've all had this, very abrupt transition to virtual learning, which I know we're deeply concerned is going to continue to compromise the future of our young people. And all of a sudden, this new wave of an in-person opportunity came up. And the major question of this discussion is, is it innovation or is it racism? Is this parent ingenuity or is this segregation Jim Crow 2020? Mr. Dorian, your thoughts.
See.
Well, one of the other things I'll say before you jump into is that the rise in homeschooling has been record-breaking across the country. Like, families are deeply concerned that their child's future is going to be compromised. That's happening, like I heard that in North Carolina, when they opened up the applications for homeschooling, the server broke. And it's been an uptick trend in multiple states across the country. And in these communities like in San Francisco, these parents are sort of leading this charge around this. So laying all that context out, Miss Mary Thomas.
Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation for me, because even when we think about, like what parent choice looks like and what parent ingenuity looks like, I think about my upbringing, right? So my mother was a school teacher from roots in South Carolina, but Jersey girl all the way. And my father immigrated here from Guyana when he was around my age. And so for my parents, like, education was huge, right? Like, I had no choice but to do what I had to do academically and in school, but my education didn't end in school. So I will remember vividly, like, coming home after school and just having like a regular day and coming home and having to watch Eyes on the Prize or watching Selma or watching a Ruby Bridges movie. I don't know how many times I done seen some of these movies, right? Because my mother in particular, and she was a teacher, and also just like was really conscious about just her Blackness and Black pride, always made sure that I knew that my teaching didn't and shouldn't never end in the classroom. And so there is something to be said about marginalized people who have always created a pod, who have always stood in the gap when what was available wasn't enough, right? When you think about how public education started in this country, public education was never originally an idea of the founding fathers. Public education was founded by newly freed slaves who said that I need to make sure that the next generation of Black people who were illegal, it was illegal for us to read and write, can read and write and vote and legislate and serve in Congress. And so this idea of people making something out of nothing, creating a movement and a legacy out of the muck and the mire, isn't unique to Americans. It's definitely not unique to Black Americans. And it's something that should be respected, right? And cultivated. At the same time, we think about where we are today, right? We do exist in a country that is deeply stratified by race and class. And we have to, particularly now when we think about these pandemic pods, think about how a refuge for you, if you come from a place of privilege, being socioeconomically more privileged, having a racial privilege of being white, or all these other domains of privilege, your refuge can be rooted in someone else's inequity. And there's something problematic about that. And so I think that two things can be true at once, right? That as a parent, you have every right, and you should try to make sure your baby has what they need. At the same time, when you come from a position of power, where you can say that I can choose to take my kid out of this school and teach them and find 5 other moms who can come on a rotating basis with me because I can work remotely, right? I'm not an essential worker where I have to be in space every single day. And I need childcare for my kid. No, I can be that for my kid, right? Like, you have to understand that comes from a place of privilege, and privilege comes with responsibility. And so there is an air of real willful ignorance, if I'm going to be completely honest, for folks who are just saying, well, no, it's just about parent choice. Parent choice can be rooted in privilege too. And that's not necessarily something to feel, you know, that's not something that you should be ashamed of, but it's something that you need to recognize and work to rectify. And again, like my brother Ethan and Everton shared earlier, everything in the pandemic has only reified the inequities that have been here for hundreds of years. And so we have a lot of work to do. But, you know, I'll say this, and I'm going to be quiet because I know other people want to speak. Just today, I had my young people from our organization. I run a girls organization called She Wins that works with middle and high school girls in the city of Newark. We just finished our very last day of our first ever summer virtual program. And today we were honored to have our Mayor Baraka come and speak to them. And one of the first questions that the young people came up with to the mayor is, Mayor, you're a father. What would you do if your kids were in Newark Public Schools right now? Right? And he said, you know, I would do what I had to do, but I don't know if I would send them, right? And I would use my tools to make sure they have what they need. And so it's a nuanced conversation, and I'm glad that we're having it. I know there's a lot more that we can unpack, but it's just not that black and white. But we have to be conscious about how even our privilege is something that we all share responsibility for.
That was beautiful. I just want to damn it. The other thing I just want to say to everyone watching on YouTube, thank you. If you value content like this, hit subscribe, hit like, hit share. And we also are taking questions from YouTube. So if you have any questions for Dorian, Everton, or Ethan, submit them and we'll get to those also. Mr. Blair.
This is definitely a lose-lose situation. And I think that we have been weighing the multiple trade-offs at once, and also trying to do as best we can with the inequities that everyone has spoken to. And all that said, it doesn't surprise me at all that homeschooling has trended up. And it doesn't surprise me at all that the same privatization of the previous public system is now taking shape in a nuanced and different way, where we saw people who could just move into different communities and get a different quality education before. And now they're able to restructure their home community with other people where they can either, you know, afford some supplementary tutoring or do something else in order to supplement their child's education for good reason. The difference is when you are someone elected to oversee a public good, I believe that it is our responsibility to administer that public good as fairly and as equitably as possible. And so where I come in my role is understanding where the inequities that we already were struggling with will be exacerbated, what plans we're putting in place to address them right now, and then realizing what we need to even build and ramp up toward for when school reopening in person does become feasible. And that's where I think that this is actually a pragmatic conversation that we need to be having, and we need to be rallying around the support that we can get from the federal government with essentially unlimited spending in a way that we as local bodies cannot do on our own, and figure out how to really provision that public good so that it meets every child's needs. And that's I think my biggest concern right now with the trend of how people are kind of just doing their own thing in the pandemic. Like, that is fine. Everyone is going to have to do that. And we are enough, and we can do this well as we continue to build villages and build community and figure it out and be resourceful and lean on one another. And we should do so in a way that saves grandma's life and grandpa's life by being really intentional about how we're collectively gathering and following all of the public health guidance. And then we also need to be thinking about those bigger questions about, okay, now when kids do return, and you've got a whole set of folks that have had really enriched experiences that other folks have not, how do you fill those gaps? And how do you continue to provide for those kids? One of the things, Ethan, that you mentioned was one-to-one. And urban districts across the country have been saying this, right? Like, we are moving in a technological direction. There is going to be a need for every kid to be able to access and utilize the computer. Why was it not something that we were planning for all along? And there are many districts that, mine included, are not meeting the demonstrated need of the community. And where we would previously have the provision to afford textbooks for everyone, we now need to reconsider what that looks like and what that entails, because in a virtual environment, we can't even meet the need in the most basic way if we can't provide them access to the internet and access to learning through a device. And so, you know, I think that there's going to be a huge challenge ahead of us, notwithstanding that there's already going to be an economic one with the kind of revenue dips that we're seeing in states across the country. It's just going to be another reason why we have to look at our public good as one that it truly is. It's public, and that means that we have to have our government leaders properly govern over that public good.
So look, I will. I'm gonna be the first to admit this. It is hard to come behind a Dorian in Everton. I want to say that on the record. So anyone ever asked me how I felt about this moment, I just want to acknowledge that in front of everyone and say that Ashely to everything that they said, right? But the thing that I will add, right, not to belabor the point, is that there has been a real lack of leadership. And because of that lack of leadership, states and different districts are like forced to try to figure out the answers. And I think we're watching what happens locally when you either have superstars or when you have folks who are just, been, lowing, trying to just survive, right? And I think many folks in our system are just trying to survive. We're trying to do regular school right now virtually, and we have never done, we're all relatively young. None of us has never started a school year virtually. Not when we was in college, not when we was in elementary, ain't never happened. But we're now starting virtually, right? And that lack of leadership is really trending in what we're seeing with each different public body. Now, I also just want to acknowledge this relative to that, right? The government essentially found trillions of dollars just because now we're in a crisis. They found trillions of dollars. I don't understand how, if we can, in this respect, find trillions of dollars for that particular thing, right? Why can't we find trillions of dollars for other issues that we know in real respects only weakens us as a country around education and educational needs? And I think Adorian talked about this earlier. Education was like the last thing on the totem pole. And so it's almost like we are purposefully creating these spaces where families have to make decisions that then end up being publicly debated about as to whether or not they're being equitable or not equitable and all this other stuff. When if we just put the money where it's supposed to be, and then give individuals the opportunity to create smaller classrooms sizes, where this, where a pandemic wouldn't really cause this much inequity, right? But because of the way in which we've been running these systems, it's only exacerbating the current circumstances and situations and making families have to choose from two truths that, I think on both ends of the spectrum hold weight either way. And I'm talking as a parent of a public school student who's in 4th grade, who could benefit from being in person but is virtual, and a private school student who's in high school who is going in person, and we just pray over her every morning. But it's a total different environment. And so, you know, when you talk about these two things, I think for our parents and the choice that we want to be able to offer parents in this moment, it does feel like, you know, we're forcing them into a situation because of the lack of leadership, and our inability to find money when it, you know, I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And to build on your comment about following Dorian Everton, I don't want to follow it. None of y'all, which is why I'm not trying. I'm just saying I'm cool because I know them.
You can switch the order.
So all of you are really insightful, and I enjoyed that perspective. I'm going to move to an audience question. Looks like it's from another school board member, Brian Gadlin. He says, as a school board member, it's challenging being bullied and blackmailed by state and federal government to send children and staff back prematurely. So that's not the case in my state, but is that happening with you, Everton?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I
You
mean,
want to respond to that?
sure. I was the lone person to speak out against our school reopening plan. We then shifted to a virtual start. It was contentious. It was also ridiculous. It's a managerial conversation. And one of the things that I actually think when Ethan was speaking about choice, both of these choices are kind of false to begin with. Like in Georgia, we had some school districts that chose to reopen. Y'all probably saw photos and coverage of these districts, Cherokee and Paulding counties, and they've already had to quarantine and shut down and do all, like there's just not a true plan for how you will manage the reality that when kids get infected with this virus, which is still rampant in many communities across the country, most communities across the country, there's not actual recourse that includes keeping kids in that building. And so to avoid what will already be a disrupted school environment, we've got to have a plan that makes sense and that teachers can actually effectively administer. And so there was a huge kind of implicit and explicit urge from our governor, from many of our leaders in the state to reopen. And I completely understand the rationale, which I agree is a problem with which we need to contend and support and figure out an economic one. But the response to the economic problem cannot be a false solution that will only end up in the same scenario that we're trying to do a better job with in the first place, which is an equitable virtual environment. And so we should figure out the economics. Clearly we can. We have the capacity and the willpower to do what is economically profitable and necessary for small and large businesses in this country. We have shown that already. And so do not put that burden on public institutions that are already strapped for cash without the collateral and necessary resources in order to do so. I mean, the bullying is hard, but I also feel pretty firm in my belief and at least know that I'm representing the community that elected me, and we're going to keep pushing for better.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. You mentioned teachers, and I want to build on this aspect of what Pandemic Pause is representing for teachers in terms of an opportunity to earn more. You know, some teachers are being paid, public school educators, credential teachers are being paid, you know, twice or three times what they normally make in order to support pandemic pods. And so it also represents some semblance of normalcy. And a lot of educators, at least that I've spoke to, and it sounds like this won't be the case for Everton's district, but you know, they really miss being in person with their kids. And so this pandemic pod surge has meant a pay benefit for them. What is your message to these teachers, and what do you think about this opportunity? We start with Ethan this time, and then Dorian.
You know, I keep thinking about this as a parent, right? And my mind is really fixated on what does it mean, like, and what does it mean to be a parent in this moment, when, you know, the creation of pods and teachers being able to essentially find, you know, be, in some cases, be paid better in a pod than they are in a classroom. And, you know, as a son of two teachers, you know, this is, it's a weird thing. I think I kind of draw us back to like when we first went virtual in March, right? If y'all remember that, there was a whole lot of stuff going on social media talking about, man, I love I love our teachers. Our teachers are amazing. I didn't even know my kid was like this. I need to apologize to my teachers, all kind of stuff. And now we're restarting school. And the virus has actually gotten worse, right? We actually have more cases than we did in March in terms of like that we know about, and all these things, right? And now, you know, we are in this situation where we have teachers who are put in positions where we're like the health trend data. We just need these kids out of and put them back in school, right? And teachers aren't really valued in that way that we were when we were first dealing with the virus. And I just, you know, it gets me thinking a little bit. You know, to Everton's point when we first started this conversation about the ask around improving teacher pay, right? You know, what are we actually doing to make sure that this profession of teaching, right, is kept a profession that will be and allow for lifelong teachers? I have this school in my district where I have I have two daughter mom pairs, and they're teaching together, and they're generations apart, but it's just so beautiful to see them teaching together. But I say all that to say, you know, in this moment, as we look at pods and the creation of pods, right? You know, you have situations where I think teachers will ultimately be having to figure out, you know, what's best for them. Because in my district, and I'd be curious to hear what's happening in other districts about this, I have teachers who are resigning from the classroom because of, you know, fears and all the in the rightful things. And as someone who's had COVID, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. And then they have the opportunity, I think, in some respects, to be in a more safer environment, to deal with smaller classroom sizes. But it goes back to what Everton talked about in the beginning, and what I think I said, and Dorian has talked about this as well. We have always just needed to create smaller classroom sizes across the board. And if we did this, there wouldn't even be a need for this conversation around pods. Now, the last thing I want to say this, because I know we're not there, but if I think if our parents are asked to create and lead and do all this pod stuff, I think we will ultimately see the inequities continue to exist. And that's just by virtue of, like, you know, we all hang out with the people who we're like-minded with and all these other things. And I think if the district, and I've seen this, districts are taking leads on creating pods for families, so that the children who are on free and reduced lunch and from low-income families, they're able to be taken care of. But again, I think, to my point, that wouldn't be necessary if we were able to get the funding necessary to have smaller classroom sizes, and we could just go back into classrooms and figure out how to do it with the 5 to 8 students per class. So, you know, I say all that to say, I'll let my colleagues talk about that. I know I talked about a lot of stuff there, but I just come from this as a parent and as a son of teachers, and thinking through this is really critical.
Mr. Dorian.
Yes, I mean, similar to Ethan, like, I recognize my own kind of bias in this. You know, I come from this as someone who works directly with young people in real time. I was never a formal teacher, but I'm an educator. You know, I run youth development programs. I teach them, I develop them, I create them. And so for me, having done that, for the past, 10 years, if you include college and after college, right? All that time being in real time with little Black and brown children from the cities of Newark and Chester, Philadelphia, to this summer doing it all virtual, right? And not being able to hug my kids and not being able to say hey to mom when she picks them up. There's a real trauma in losing that physical and real life intimacy that you have with your young people when you are a teacher or an educator. And so I understand those teachers who are like, I just want to be with my babies again. And I get that. I understand that. At the same time, to Ethan's point, we also know that teachers have never been getting paid what they deserve. And so for a teacher who is in some cases being asked to do more work in this hybrid or virtual case than before, right? I mean, there are some districts where, depending on what the synchronous instructional model looks like, you can have students physically in your classroom who you're teaching while your other students are watching. You have to manage both, grade both, classroom control both, but districts aren't talking about adding extra aides in these classes, right? And I'm not even just talking about students with special needs. I'm talking gen ed classes where teachers are having to literally manage two entirely different modes of instruction at the same time. Like, that's a lot. And so to Ethan's point, like, I understand the urge for folks who want to be either back in the classroom or just frankly say, I want to get paid what I deserve. Again, all of these issues that we're talking about are really getting at the bleeding and not the wound, right? That's what this pandemic exposes. All of these have been issues that have existed far beyond March 2020. And so this moment is forcing us to deal with who we say we are versus who we really are. And unfortunately, the chasm between the two is far too wide. And the fact that teachers are having to choose to say, yeah, I may go and do this because I know I may not be valued by my actual district in the way that I deserve. It just exposes the gaps that have already existed, and we have a lot of work to do. And the number one thing that we have to do to really make a dent in this issue is actually listen to teachers, right? Like, actually listen to teachers, listen to parents, listen to young people. If we stopped making decisions about people and not with them, we wouldn't even be in this place to begin with. And so we've got a lot of work to do. And I say that, myself, yes, having been the youngest woman elected to the school board, having worked with young people, having loved my city, from down to the bone, I still have work to do. Like, we all have work to do. A position or an experience or an intimate connection to an issue just because we're from that community or we're of it doesn't mean that we are exempt of growth and of doing more of the work. So we all have more listening to do. We all have more learning to do. And I'm hoping that this moment forces all of us as school board members, as just just tried and true democratic citizens, to do more of that so we can really grow from this moment.
I'll just add, pods are not hugely surging in Gwinnett County, but where I have seen this occur, I actually think that it's more of a public to private loss. And education in any form, I believe, is God ordained, life-changing service work. I don't knock teachers who choose to go to private school, even though I know that the teachers that we have that are in our most underserved public schools are doing the real work. And so to that effect, I also think that there's a little bit of reconciliation that we have to do as a nation and as a larger public school community to realize that we had been kind of just going with the flow for a long time and not doing right by these kids in the first place. In probably all of our school systems, we spend more than $10,000 per kid a year to give them an education that may or may not actually meet their needs. And so I don't know, if you paid me $100,000 to teach 10 kids, I'm going to figure it out and they would all get everything that they And so this idea of pods where you can literally give these teachers what they need and deserve, and these kids what they need and deserve in a setting that is actually manageable, I do not criticize any person, any adult who is choosing that. I think systemically, the conversation that we need to have is why it is the case where we can never seem to provide in the public setting, and the public or the private setting always can supplement in a way that we can look at and never successfully replicate or exceed. And that's the same thing we're seeing even like with the COVID responses in the hospitals. If you go to a private hospital, your likelihood of surviving the virus is much higher. You're going to have like a smaller nurse to patient ratio, and like all of these things that we are seeing in every industry and all at once are just coming to the forefront. And I mean, my thoughts are that we as a government need to do a better job. What that entails is actually probably just resourcing the heck out of our communities in the ways that we know will actually get to the service work that our people need to do. And so I'm tired about like, you know, creating all these budget items where there's a program where now you got to like figure out how teachers are going to do more work with the same amount of kids that they previously had. And you've got all these other competing priorities when we could just give more adults the capacity to do the work that we know needs to be done for kids. And so I think that's a little bit of the shifting to just recognizing the importance of people's time and paying them for that time. And that's one of the hopes I have for it, at least coming out of this.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, with everything you said, not faulting educators, the way you frame the work of becoming an educator, and how we resource the work. We're approaching the top of the hour. I wanted to kind of touch on Black student achievement again before we close out. I'll just say briefly that in San Francisco, we're also going back virtual. I don't know if I mentioned already, I'm on the Board of Education in San Francisco. And because, you know, you guys are dropping gems nationally and locally. If you're still watching on YouTube, thank you. And please hit subscribe if you value and you want to see more of these types of discussions. We're looking at a phased approach, and, you know, our state has granted counties more funds for protective equipment, but we're still going virtual. And, you know, the virtual reality is a direct response. Like the pod phenomenon is direct response to like what's happening virtually, but connected to what Dorian said earlier. You know, this started way before this idea, like we're going to teach our own children, is not a new one. The profiteering that's happening is cause for concern, and there is some benefit to that, and there's some things that I think should be openly criticized around that. But educators want to educate, and you know, I think virtual is a safe thing, but we're all doing it knowing at some level we're compromising our students' future because they're not getting the full experience of an education that we know can happen in person. That's especially for our younger children, which kind of connects to Black student achievement. I'll just start by saying that in San Francisco, you know, we have the 7th largest urban school district. We have the widest achievement gap in the state of California. And that's been the case for at least 40 years. Now we've added a pandemic on top of that. So we couldn't do it right, you know, and I'm laughing to keep from crying, right? San Francisco is one of those storied cities that had massive gentrification, which, you know, led to a huge plummet in the Black population. We're now as a city at about 3%. I want to say as a district, maybe 6%. Before COVID, our chronic absenteeism was at 39%. And so, for African American students. So being on the school board, it's been very frustrating for me to see what's been happening around Black student achievement. And I don't have, it's hard to have confidence that we're going to be able to turn it around virtually, right? So that's my level setting. Can you all kind of speak to what Black student what's going on with Black student achievement in your city and what you think? I mean, I know now Everton, everyone's going back, but now the public health risk is still present. And I'd like to start with you, then go with Ethan and Dorian. What's happening around Black student achievement in your district, and what do you think the current situation is going to mean for our young people moving forward?
It's a big unknown, but what I am acutely concerned about is the exacerbation of the existing inequities that we've been talking about. There is also, though, a correlating racialization and politicization of this issue of the COVID-19 pandemic just writ large, that I think is showing up in who feels comfortable wearing a mask, not wearing a mask, or sending their kid to school right now, not sending their kid to school right now. And I don't have hard data on it, but it is very obvious from like who is saying what at the board meetings and what the percentage of schools that are choosing the in-person option are versus the racial demographic of that school. And you can, what I think will speak to is more of our Black students in the district will end up getting a longer period of virtual learning than our white students if we are to allow the choice that we initially said that we were. And what that could mean is that the inequities might be even more so exacerbated, because I do think that the in-person instruction will exceed what teachers will be able to do simultaneously in the virtual space. How we do that across different schools and within schools, I think will vary tremendously. In those schools that will have many more of the students, like my high school, for instance, where the majority of parents opted for digital learning, that I think is going to just take shape in how well we're able to do that, period. And then what we do to reinforce instruction when kids do return once we move out of this pandemic. And so that's like, I think we need to be thinking about that right now, because we know that there will be like intense intervention and support that we will need to provision for reopening. And, you know, some kids will have lost anywhere from a couple months to a half a year. Like, we don't even know what the full length of this scope will be. And that's really troubling for me. But the overall kind of racialization of the issue is also a mess in our county. And, you know, there's partisanship in that. There's just also kind of, I think, racism individualized and internalized regarding the threat that this virus can cause community, and the perception that some people might not be at risk, therefore they can and do not care about others. And that's a deep concern that I have, and why I've been pretty vocal about my position from the beginning.
Thank you. Ethan?
Yeah, I just want to build on Everton's point around this shared responsibility in this moment. Like, you know, someone wearing a mask or not wearing a mask is about this collective belief that we are responsible to one another and should be good stewards of each other's health in this moment. I think, you know, to Everton's point around, you know, the privilege and really the racist privilege to not be able to wear a mask and to feel like you are fine. I think that is problematic and pretty much sums up, you know, I think 2020 and the other pandemic that we have not spent a lot of time talking about, but definitely needs to be addressed within. It's like the pandemic within a pandemic, and very clear. You know, the end of locally in New Orleans, like the achievement gap is clear. It exists. I mean, you have gaps around math and literacy between white and Black students. Somewhere on a scale to 100, you're talking about a 52% gap in those different areas, right? That's problematic. And so, you know, what I'm clear about is, you know, our system wasn't doing the best job of getting our students in an equitable state before COVID-19, and now putting them in a virtual sense is not going to help that, particularly when you're trying to do school in the exact same way, but just virtual. And so, I think that there has to be some form of innovation that comes about in this moment. And, I think I'm watching some schools step up to do that. And I want to admit, I think that this virtual school setting is not, there will be some and need to be some learnings from this, because I do believe that you'll have some students and cohort of students who I think will thrive in this setting. And you have other cohorts of students who will not. And if we create this, if we're able to move into a more differentiated model of learning, I think that will only increase our ability to meet the needs of where students are individually, and embrace that, and embrace the technology that will allow for that to happen. Because my fourth grader is learning Zern, are using Zern to deal with math, and he is zipping through. But in his ELA, the young brother has some work to do. That means I have some work to do. But I'm clear in this moment that whether or not we should be focused in on the traditional way in which we've done it in terms of the age cohort model versus a mastery cohort model of way in which we promote students, I think we could definitely think through that as well. Now, the last thing I want to just say and just be very clear about is, at the end of all this, we have to address this thing called poverty, right? Like that's just the biggest thing we just need to deal with. Because I believe if you deal with poverty and in our racist systems, and you do those two things really well, I promise you, I think we will be just fine. I think there's nothing that solving poverty and racism, if solving those two things, there's nothing that Black people and people of color can't accomplish if we solve those two oppressive situations. So I'll end with that, and I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, so much was said here. I'm thinking about what Ethan just shared about poverty, right? And even when we think about the whole idea of the achievement gap and where it comes from, and the whole system of standardized testing and high stakes testing, a lot of the systems that we have in place with standardized testing are really rooted in outdated, essentially white supremacist methods from the 20th century that were used to essentially determine, okay, how do we prove that a certain group of people are better than another, right? Like that's actually, when you look at the origins of a lot of the high stakes testing that exist, like those really are their origins. Now, granted, today, it's not that black and white, but there is something to be said about, does standardized testing as we know it adequately assess the brilliance and talent and capacity of our students? And there is something to be said about, to an extent, yeah, I mean, it's important to have metrics and measure how students are faring, but there are those limitations. And so I think one of the things that we're forced to do in this moment, to this point about education innovation, is just question the limitations of standardized testing, and question the limitations of how we measure student success, right? I know some young people right now who, because they are doing virtual, or at least when the school year was going on, when they were doing virtual for the first time, now they're able to start this business that they wanted to do, right? And so they're running their businesses for the first time on Instagram. They're making shirts and they're selling them and posting it on their story, right? There is this way in which these moments where schooling as we know it is being forced to actually have our young people say, there's something about this shift that's actually allowing me to shine in a way that I couldn't do before in schooling as we know it. And so we have to think more about, when we come back to open the school year, be it in a virtual space, hybrid, or in person, what are we doing more with our content that's actually culturally relevant, that's career readiness based, and that's actually getting our young people ready for life after high school? When we think about the achievement gap, a lot of young people who disengage from school disengage because of a lack of relevance. They don't feel like they're learning something that's actually going to benefit them when they graduate. And so we have to think about, how do we make school and education something that young people feel like they can actually buy into? and that's actually something that benefits them, even down to the material that they're learning, right? So the state of New Jersey has a piece of legislation called the Amistad Act, which mandates that young people across the state in every district learn African American and Black history, right? Now, this was written and championed by a Black assembly person in the year 2002. Today in 2020, you see that implementation across the state. Now, it's not where it should be, right? But it exists. And so there's something to be said about if I'm a young person and I'm learning history about me, right? Or if I'm learning about these other groups of people, I feel like I own this curriculum and I own my educational experience rather than it owning me. And so, yeah, I'll show up to school more and I'll be less chronically absent, right? And we know that when you have less chronic absence, that also leads to more student achievement, right? So it's such a layered and a nuanced conversation. And the last thing I'll say is that, I think that to Ethan and Everton's points, there are some ways in which virtual learning has benefited some kids. I know some students who were being severely bullied, and because it's virtual, they don't have to go through that anymore, right? Or they don't have to worry about what kind of sneakers they got on, or what color they're wearing, because they're going to be safe in their house. And so there are some ways in which virtual learning offers opportunities in addition to the obvious losses when it's not equitably done. And so we have to maximize the moment on both ends, on both seeing how we can mitigate losses, but also maximize the opportunities that this moment of crisis forces us to enter.
Yeah, absolutely. You all I've kept you past the hour that I promised I wouldn't keep you past. And I just want to end by saying thank you. There is one final question I want you all to weigh in on quickly. I just want to make a few quick announcements. In the description of the YouTube link, you'll find all the social media handles for Mr. Blair, Mr. Ashely, and Miss Mary Thomas. Please stay connected to them, watch them. They're going places. I think that's evident from today, but support their leadership. To pick up on Dorian's point, I will be selling merchandise like the teenagers he knows. So sign up to my newsletter at stevoncook.com, and you'll be the first to see that. Subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. And thank you again to the good people at School Board Partners and young elected officials for helping uplift and get the word out about today's event. Our last and final question: where do we go from here? And if you can answer,
you want to end with that?
You got it. Yeah, I went with the suggestions. You got another one you want me to do?
I'm gonna let Everton take it. Go ahead, Everton. Where are we going?
And your only restriction is to do it within 3 sentences.
Fill out the census, vote on November 3rd, and continue to put pressure on everyone who represents us to do what's right.
Boom. Mr. Ashely.
Move to one of these great cities that these individuals are serving in, because they're great leaders, and just support them as much as you can. And I would say, in closing, that we have to move beyond the platitudes of just talking about what it is that we say we're going to do relative to dealing with the issues around racism and poverty, and really put some teeth around what we're trying to do to accomplish those goals of tackling those big issues for our communities.
Ooh, I got 3 words: listen, pray, and work. We got to listen to what our young people are saying, listen to what our parents are telling us, listen to what our teachers, and let's yield to the needs of our people who need us to make right and just decisions on their behalf. And we got to pray. I'm a spiritual person, and I know that's not everyone's things. Everyone's entitled to their belief, but we have to understand that it's bigger than us. And I think that the pandemic teaches us that there is nothing that happens in my individual life that doesn't have a ripple effect on somebody else. So whether you're praying to a formal God or you are acknowledging that there is just a bigger purpose, understand that you have a responsibility to do the work. And just have those quiet moments where you can try to discern what your part of the work is. And then lastly, of course, work. So everything that you guys are saying, vote, fill out the census, advocate for your kids, advocate for your community. And we know if folks are Christian in the house who may know this phrase, that faith without works is dead. And so we got to have faith that things will get better, but we also got to put in the work to ensure that happens. And so I'm proud to know each of you, my brother Stevon, for opening this platform for all of us to dialogue, Everton and Ethan, who I admire deeply and greatly, for doing the work. I'm proud to be doing the work with you, and I'm just looking forward to what all of us, and then folks who aren't even on this call, who are listening in, who are chatting, who are just doing the work, whose names we won't know, will continue to do, to make sure that young people have what they need to thrive in the midst and against all odds. Against all odds.
Boom. No more to say to that. To the good people of Gwinnett, the good people of Orleans Parish, the good people of Newark, you are in good hands. Thank you all for, again, the three of you for participating. With that, peace, and we out.